graphing y equals minus 2 cos open bracket 4x minus pi close bracket. The general cosine equation is y equals a, the amplitude, cos b open bracket bx minus c close bracket plus d. The first thing we do is find the amplitude, which is modulus of a, and a is minus 2, if we compare it with that, and that's modulus of minus 2 is 2. Point number 2 is to look at period. The period is 2 pi over b, which is b is 4. This is b here, bx, 4x. So b is 4. So 2 pi divided by 4 is pi over 2. We need to, number 3 is x scale, and that is period over 4, and period is pi over 2. Therefore you get pi over 8, because 4 times 2 is 8. If you divided something by, how do I get pi over 8? Well, pi over 2 divided by 4. If you're dividing something by 4, you're timesing it by 1 over 4. That's how I get pi over 8. Pi over 8 is 22.5 degrees. And pi over 2 equals 90 degrees. The parent function, which is cos x of that, where the period is 0 to 2 pi, this function, the period will be 90 degrees, pi over 2. 0 to 2 pi, that means that's when it starts to repeat itself after 2 pi. Then it goes on to 4 pi. So every 2 pi's, it repeats itself. This will repeat itself every pi over 2. And the scale here is period over 4 because there are 4 quadrants. That's why we're dividing the period by 4. There are 4 quadrants here. If we divide 2 pi by 4, we get pi over 2. So this is pi over 2 here, another pi over 2, another pi over 2, another pi over 2 is 90 degrees. Likewise, this is going to be 22.5 degrees 4 times. So the start of the period here is you set x to 0. And the end of the parent graph is to set x to 2 pi. The start of the period for us is to set, we don't have x, we have 4x minus pi, so we set 4x minus pi to 0. Therefore, 4x equals pi, x equals pi over 4. And pi over 4 is 45 degrees. And at the end period, we set the brackets to 0, to 2 pi. 4x minus pi equals 2 pi. And 4x equals 3 pi. X equals 3 pi over 4. And that equals 135 degrees. So what I meant is the start period for the start of the period is at 45 degrees, pi over 4, and the end is at 135 degrees. If you take away 45 from 135 degrees, you get 90 degrees, which is the period. Point number 5 is to look at the any vertical translation. In this case, it's 0 because d is 0. D is the vertical translation, and therefore y equal to 0. That means in this case, this is plus d, and d is 0, and that's why it's on the x-axis where y equal to 0. So this curve will be on the x-axis where y equals to 0. So point number 6 is there any reflection? Yes, there is a reflection, -2. The minus indicates the reflection about x-axis. And it's been shifted from 0 to pi over 4. And that's what this is. This one here is pi over 4. And this is the phase shift. It's been shifted from 0 to pi over 4. And then the ending, which should have been pi over 2, is now, because period is pi over 2, it's now 3 pi over 4. So now we've got a graph to plot. The starting point, this is 1, and that's 2. This is -1, and that's -2. The starting point is pi over 4. And pi over 4 is also 2 pi over 8. So I just want it to be the same as the pi over 8. So they have the same denominator. So it's easy to add that to that. And it finishes at 3 pi over 4. That's also equal to 6 pi over 8. So what I did was times the top by 2 times the bottom by 2. To again make it have the same denominator, so it's easy to add them. And the pi period, pi over 2, you can turn that, make that 4 pi over 8. So same thing. So times that by 4, times that by 4. Now the starting period is at pi over 4, which is 2 pi over 8. So this pi over 4, so that's where we start. So I'll put the start there. But because it's a cosine, cosine starts here, the positive cosine, but it's reflected. So it's going to start at -2. So it will start, instead of starting at +1, it starts at -2 because it's a negative. So start there. So it's been shifted by pi over 4. That's the shift. That's starting there, and the next one will be, we'll be adding pi over 8. So this is pi over, from there to there is pi over 8. So that's pi over 8 added. So that will be here, pi over 8. And the next one will be, so because it's coming right down to 0, so it's raising up there. It's coming back to 0, and it's going to go up. So next one will be another pi over 2, pi over 8. So this is pi over 8 going up to +2. So it goes there, and it goes there, and then it'll coming down by another pi over 2 to here, and then go up to pi over. So that's 3 pi over 4. So you could write that as 6 pi over 8 if you like, and this one will be 4 pi over 8, and that will be 2 pi over 8 if you like. And this will be 3 pi over 8. That will be, so this one is 4 pi over 8, so that will be 5 pi over 8. And this will be 6 pi over 8. So that's a good way to run it up. So it's been shifted by 45 degrees. And the graph would then, we can draw the graph now. So that's a turning point there. And it's just gonna go all the way to meet that line over there. and there's a turning point here too. So it's just going to meet that, and there's a turning point there, and there's another turning point here. Okay, so that's the first quadrant here, second quadrant, third quadrant, and the fourth quadrant. So let's plot this another period to the right. So now we're going to go back down here by another pi over 8, and then we go up there to another pi over 8, and then we come down to another pi over 8, and then we finish at this bit here. So this is another pi over 8. So now we're going to draw the second period. So that will be going down there, and that goes up. That's a turning point there. And goes up there, and that then go up to the minimum here. So now that's two periods now. We've just drawn two periods. So that's the graph of y equals minus 2 cos 4x minus pi. So remember to do the amplitude first. Amplitude is the height from there to there. So that's the amplitude. Before I just put my ruler there and just measure the height. So that's the amplitude. That's the amplitude. That distance here is A. And it's same thing here. The period tells us because the period here is 0 to 2 pi, and the period from this one is 90 degrees, pi over 2. So from there to there is 90 degrees. So it's been squashed and stretched. Okay, from that distance to that distance is a period, and that's the second period. That's another period again. The shift is from that distance to that distance, so that's half a period. So that's a shift. So that's a shift. That's the amplitude. What else is important here? So you do your scaling. So that's your scaling. So period, amplitude, scaling, and that means you divide it by 4 quadrants. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the 4 quadrants. That's why it's divided by 4. The start is to work out your period. You set the function here to 0, and then you work out your shift, and then you set your function here to 2 pi, so you work out the end of your shift. Vertical translation, is there any movement of the function up or down? Reflection, yes, that's a reflected because the parent cosine starts at positive and this one starts at negative, so it's been reflected along the x-axis.